Great. So, welcome on behalf of the Toronto Field Naturalists. My name is Ellen Schwartzel, and I'm the current TFN president and also a member of TFN's lecture team, and I'll be your meeting host this evening. Let's begin by acknowledging the land and the people of the land. The Toronto Field Naturalists wish to acknowledge this land through which we walk. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississauga of the Credit River. Today, it is still the home of many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to be on this land. Thanks very much to all the volunteers of our lecture team for organizing our whole lecture series this past year, helping Toronto's nature community stay informed on the biodiversity of our area and also stay abreast of current issues. And this evening, we will be hearing about Toronto's green planning framework, a very multifaceted topic and lots to learn. So we have a terrific guest speaker who I'll introduce in a minute. First, let me welcome guests who may be attending today. This event has been promoted on several platforms, and thanks to Jane, it also got a shout out on CBC Radio's Fresh Air. Do let us know how you heard about the event through the chat. Be aware, again, we're recording this event, and the recording will be available online on TFN's website in the future. We're going to ask that you mute yourself during the lecture and also turn off your video, especially if we plan to be moving around. It really reduces distractions for everyone else. After the presentation, please stay to thank our speaker and to join in the discussion. And I'll also share a few sneak peeks of upcoming events, so do please stick around. You'll have a few ways to ask a question. The chat feature is a popular choice, and so do feel free to use that. There's also a raise hand feature, and you can find that by clicking on reactions. And of course, I know that we'll all keep our comments and questions concise, friendly, and respectful. That's a core value that we want to live up to. So now I'm really delighted to introduce this evening's speaker. Jane Weninger is a senior planner with Toronto City Planning. She works at the intersection of urban planning and the natural environment by providing strategic input into major urban green space policies and initiatives, including the Toronto Biodiversity Strategy, the Toronto Ravine Strategy, and amendments to the official plan. Jane represented the city in the establishment of Canada's first national urban park and led the identification and designation of environmentally significant areas across the city. Jane collaborated with a visual artist to produce An Enduring Wilderness, a book and photography exhibition about the significance of Toronto's natural parklands. Jane believes that natural landscapes and biodiversity are fundamental to the quality of urban life. So welcome, Jane, and it's really an honor to have you sharing your time and your expertise with us. So if you are able to now share screen, and hopefully it will be all yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ellen, for that generous introduction. And I'm really happy to be here this evening and to have so many participants that are interested in learning more about what the City of Toronto is doing in the area of biodiversity. So I'm going to share my screen and start the presentation. Here we go. So I'm going to be talking to you tonight about planning for a biodiverse city. This is an outline of the presentation I'd like to give you tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about the geographic and policy context for the work that we do and for biodiversity, how we protect natural areas through our planning policies, key strategies that the city has developed, tools that we've developed to design the built environment with nature in mind, and then there'll be time for questions. So we normally also give a land acknowledgement at the beginning of a meeting. I don't think I need to repeat it today because Ellen has already given one, but the land acknowledgement is a small but important way to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples that were here before us, their millennia of knowledge and their continuing presence on this land and the shared path that we share going forward. I don't think it's news to any of us that there is also a biodiversity crisis, but often in the work that I do, people will talk about the climate crisis, but they forget about the biodiversity crisis, or it just hasn't sunk in. So I'm constantly reminding people that it's really two crises, climate and biodiversity. And I mean, we're all familiar with the issues around climate change. In terms of biodiversity, the UN has done a number of biodiversity outlooks. Outlook number 5 was produced in 2020, and it confirms what we already know, that biodiversity is declining at unprecedented rates, and that the pressures driving this decline are intensifying. But there is a bit of hope. In this document, they also said that some progress has been made in countries and areas, especially where appropriate policies were put into place. So I'd like to think that we're contributing somehow to that progress, and that some of the policies that the City of Toronto has put into place are helping to stem the decline in biodiversity. We live in a rich bioregion. This map is from the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and it shows the key elements of our biodiverse region. I think you can see my cursor. This is the Niagara Escarpment extending upwards to the Bruce Peninsula. The Oak Ridges Moraine that extends north along the ridge of land north of the Toronto area and extends towards Prince Edward County. And then surrounding the Oak Ridges Moraine is something called the protected countryside, which includes natural features and agricultural areas, which need to be protected for the long-term resilience of this region. And then finally, not least but not forgotten, is Lake Ontario and the shoreline of Lake Ontario, which is a very significant natural feature. Within this bioregional context, we have these rapidly growing urban areas, which are shown in gray in this map as settlement areas. So those settlement areas are the cities, and these cities exist within a provincial planning framework. And this framework is illustrated in this hierarchy. It is it starts as a broad and overarching framework with provincial policy documents such as the growth plan, the Greenbelt plan, the Oak Ridges Moraine plan, and the Niagara Escarpment plan would be in here as well, but they don't apply to Toronto. Also the provincial policy statement. And then getting more detailed and locally specific as we move into the city's official plan documents, the strategies that the cities have prepared to respond to certain challenges that they have. And then even more detailed and locally specific when we get down to the level of bylaws and regulations, which apply to individual development parcels. So this is the framework in which we do our work. In Toronto, 3 provincial policy documents define the provincial land use framework that we have to adhere to. The growth plan, I like to think of it as the document that defines where and how we're going to grow. And it mostly, in terms of natural heritage and biodiversity, it mostly directs protection of natural heritage in areas outside of the settlement areas. So it doesn't provide much guidance for us within the settlement areas, because that's already been dealt with through the provincial policy statement. But one new thing that it does do is it requires that municipalities identify and protect a water resource system. And that's something new. And that's something that, as part of the official plan, the municipal comprehensive reviews that the municipalities are doing right now, that is something that is going to be included in all of them. So that may be of interest, especially to people like yourselves. The second major plan that we deal with in Toronto is the Greenbelt plan. And I like to think of the Greenbelt plan as defining where not to grow and what to protect. Whoops, sorry. The growth plan mostly directs protection. The Greenbelt plan provides permanent protection to natural heritage and agricultural systems, some of which extend into the city of Toronto. It also designates urban river valleys, which you've probably heard about, and there's a provincial initiative underway at the very moment to expand the urban river valley designation. And the third key document is the provincial policy statement, which provides policies that require municipalities to protect natural features and areas for the long term, to protect the quality and quantity of water, and to direct development away from natural hazards, pardon me. This map gives you an idea of how the structure of the city of Toronto is laid out. Toronto is now the 4th largest city in North America. This urban structure gives you an overview of what natural areas exist in our city, primarily in the valleys and ravines and along the waterfront of the Lake Ontario shoreline. These are areas that we call the green space system. These are lands that are large, they have natural heritage value, and they're connected. So this is something we call the green space system in Toronto. In addition, you'll see on this map another important feature, which is the Greenbelt protected countryside. And that's in the Rouge Valley at the far east end of Toronto. And in addition, we have 4 urban river valleys, Etobicoke Creek, the Humber River, the Don River, and Morningside Creek. These are urban river valleys that have been designated in the Greenbelt plan, and they connect the Greenbelt and the Oak Ridges Moraine north of the city to Lake Ontario. So now we're going to start to drill down to a little more into what's happening in Toronto. So this is the skyline of Toronto in 2006. The next image I'm going to show is the skyline 10 years later. Whoops, sorry, did something happen? Sorry, I try that again. Skyline in 2006 and the skyline 10 years later in 2015. I'm just going to go back 2006, 2015. That just gives you a sense of how much Toronto is growing. And this is already 7 years out of date. So we've grown even more. Toronto alone is expected to grow by 700,000 people and more than 450,000 jobs in the next 30 years. That's an incredible amount of growth. Within this growing city, though, it may be surprising to learn that Toronto still has a surprisingly rich biodiversity. And we in city planning have documented some of this richness in something called the Biodiversity Booklet series, which you should check out. They're on our website. And these are images from the covers of those books. And they're amazing resources and beautiful pieces of beautiful publications. Everybody enjoys them. I'm sure most of you are familiar with them since you're very already very knowledgeable about what's going on in the natural environment area. In terms of what we have in the city of Toronto, 17% of our area is ravines. About 13.5% of Toronto is terrestrial natural habitat. We have 6 watersheds. Almost 50% of our parks are natural parkland, which is a really interesting statistic. We've got 11.5 million trees that comprise our urban canopy. Collectively, these provide over $822 million per year of ecosystem services. And then through these biodiversity booklets, we identified 38 species of mammals, 80 species of trees, shrubs, and vines, 404 species of birds. That's incredible. That's both local and migratory birds that pass through Toronto, 110 species of butterflies, 92 species of fish. And I didn't even cover the spiders and the bees. We have booklets on those as well. So amazingly, we still have quite a rich biodiversity, and that's partly due to our location on the shoreline of Lake Ontario with abundant water. We're in the migratory path of two major migratory routes. We're at the intersection of different forest zones. So there's something really unique about the Toronto area, and its biodiversity reflects that. But there are challenges, obviously. How do we integrate protection, restoration, and stewardship with increased public use of our natural areas? The natural areas are dynamic, evolving systems. They're subject to the impacts of invasive species, climate change, and urban intensification. We have to respond to that. There's a need for protection and replacement of essential aging city infrastructure that is found within our valleys and ravines. And then there's sometimes conflicting interests and visions of users and stakeholders. These are all some of the challenges that we're trying to deal with when we are planning our city. The official plan is the document which provides the foundation for protecting biodiversity in Toronto. It's a high-level document that sets out our long-term vision and policies that help guide decision-making and a variety of topics, including the environment. Now, our official plan, as I've mentioned earlier, must be consistent with provincial plans, but it can also go further, and we do. The official plan vision recognizes the importance of the natural environment, and policies in the official plan identify how the environment will be protected, restored, and enhanced through our city building activities. So most of the policies that protect the environment are found in Chapter 3.4, and they provide the foundation for most of our work on biodiversity. And these are just examples of some of the policies that you'll find in Chapter 3.4. Some policies apply directly to new development through the planning process, but other policies are more aspirational, and they aren't practical to implement through zoning bylaws or other regulatory mechanisms, but some of our strategies are embracing some of these policies. But we believe that a biodiverse city requires the right balance of push through regulatory requirements and pull through raising our expectations. The official plan defines a natural heritage system, and it includes most of Toronto's key natural heritage features and functions, such as valleys and ravines, forests and wetlands, and the shoreline of Lake Ontario. The natural heritage system is based on a systems approach, an ecosystems approach, which recognizes the importance of protecting a connected system of features and functions, and not just individual patches of habitat. So development in this system that's shown here is generally prohibited. However, infrastructure and compatible public facilities are permitted by the policies, but they must minimize impacts and protect features. The natural heritage system also overlaps on the adjacent tableland, where there are zoning and official plan development permissions. So in these areas, we have permissions to develop, and then we have this overlapping natural heritage system. So the policies seek to ensure that the development has to address the potential impacts on the natural heritage system. And we do that by requiring something called a natural heritage impact study, which is required to identify what are the potential impacts and how these impacts can be prevented or minimized. Development also has to be set back from areas like the top of bank of valleys and ravines or the shoreline of Lake Ontario. So the whole system is important. All of the green is important. It's a system, and it's connected, and that's a key aspect of it. But within this system, there are also areas that we think are particularly important, and those are the areas shown in orange. and they're called environmentally significant areas. And there are 86 of them that are currently identified in the official plan. And these are areas which are given an even higher level of protection because we try to protect these areas from any development, even compatible facilities. The only thing that is permitted in the natural heritage system, unfortunately, is infrastructure. Although infrastructure is required to avoid these areas, if there are no reasonable alternatives, infrastructure is permitted, provided it minimizes and protects and restores and enhances the feature. There we go. The official plan natural heritage policies work together with other policies and regulations to protect the natural features like the trees and the landform, and the functions like the habitat and the water infiltration. And it works, this map shows you how the natural heritage system overlaps with the Ravine Bylaw, which provides an additional layer of protection because any development within the Ravine Bylaw, even if it's not subject to a planning process, is still required to get a permit for any changes to grade or removal of vegetation. So that is those two tools, the natural heritage system and the Ravine Bylaw, work together. The Ravine Bylaw also requires compensation for the loss of trees, generally at a ratio of 3:1. Now, this is a sneak peek at some proposed changes that we're making to the official plan. This is currently out for public review. And what this shows is the proposed additions to the natural heritage system. We're proposing to add areas that are currently regulated by the Ravine Bylaw, but are not currently included in the natural heritage system. And that sometimes causes some difficulty when you're trying to apply the policy. So we're trying to make sure that they're aligned and so they're consistent, so those awkward situations don't arise. The other key feature of this, so the red areas are the areas that we're proposing to add to the natural heritage system. And the other areas I'd like to point out, if you can see the stippled areas, here's some here, but you'll see it mostly around the edges of the natural heritage system. These are areas that have been modeled by TRCA. Actually, there's a lot of them in the Scarborough area. These areas have been modeled by the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority to be areas that are what they call contributing areas. They contribute to the resilience of the natural heritage system. And we should do whatever we can in these areas to support the natural heritage system. So in the proposed policy changes that go with this map, we're encouraging that with redevelopment that there be, we encourage opportunities to encourage infiltration, to do as much planting as possible, basically to try to support the adjacent natural features and areas. So that's just gives you an idea of kind of our thinking, and this is currently out for review. So I can give you more information later if you're interested. So I just want to touch now on 4 strategies that support biodiversity in the city. The first is the Toronto Ravine Strategy, which I'm sure most of you have heard about. Toronto has more than 300 kilometers of ravines. Over 17% of the city's land area is ravines. They contain most of the city's natural parklands and natural features and biodiversity, but they also contain extensive infrastructure as well. The Ravine Strategy is Toronto's first coordinated framework to align investment across city divisions to maximize the management, use, enhancement, and protection of the ravines. And it includes 20 actions that are organized around 5 principles. And in the last 10-year capital budget approved $460 million across the ravine system for investments in the ravine, including 10 priority investment areas, the Ravine campaign, which includes the proposed loop trail, and the Into the Ravines campaign, which is a campaign to get all the different it's focused more on people that don't have good access to the ravines, getting them into the ravines so that they get to enjoy and understand the ravine system. Also invasive species management and litter cleanup. Toronto also has a biodiversity strategy, and its actions align with the Ravine strategy. The biodiversity strategy is more, it's again Toronto's first intentional and coordinated framework to support biodiversity. And interestingly, that it took till 2019 for us to put this together, but it is trying to align with provincial, federal, and international strategies and the ACHI targets you may have heard of. We're trying to bring the municipal actions in line so that we're all kind of pulling in the same direction. And it's also complements the Ravine strategy by including some actions like a Made in Toronto approach to ecological integrity monitoring framework, which is something we want to use in the ravine system to be able to guide our restoration activities. So the biodiversity strategy identifies a vision, 10 principles, and 23 actions, and it includes annual progress reporting. The next strategy I just want to touch on is Toronto's urban forest strategy. Toronto's urban canopy is an important part of Toronto's biodiversity, and we have an urban canopy target of 40%. And right now, our urban canopy is around 28%, I believe, 28 to 30%. And it is increasing. We've determined through a 10-year canopy study that our canopy increased just under 2% in 10 years. And we now have over 11.5 million trees. And this canopy study was also able to determine that street trees in particular are making a significant contribution to the urban forest. While only representing a little over 5% of the forest, they provide almost 20% of its what's called structural value, which is a forestry term. But what it's telling us is that street trees provide a lot of benefit, and street trees are things that the city can control because they're planted on the city right of way. Also, when you think about climate and resilience and where, heat is in the summer, when having a generous street tree canopy will help not only cool people's homes and adjacent buildings, but also provides people with pathways to walk where it isn't as hot. So street trees can provide provide multiple benefits. The urban canopy study also found that invasive species in Toronto have increased in the city's parks and ravines. That was not a good finding, but it makes us more aware of the problem of invasive species. And another interesting finding was that pervious land cover is increasing. So pervious is it's hard surface like concrete or paving stones, and that the most land area that's being converted from pervious to impervious is found in single family development. So single family homes are being converted. We're getting bigger homes, more paving. People want driveways, they want patios. So all of this is reducing the pervious surface in Toronto. And it's particularly noticeable in the single family land use category. So I think that's all I'm going to say about that. Also, just to let you know, Toronto has 4 separate tree bylaws that regulate the removal or injury of trees. So I think we're probably the municipality with the most tree bylaws. The Toronto also has a pollinator protection strategy. There are more than 360 species of bees and more than 100 species of butterflies and other pollinators that are identified in Toronto. So the pollinator protection strategy provides over 30 actions to support pollinators organized around 6 priority areas. And this image just kind of is to help you kind of understand how, like I've talked about these different strategies and different, the official plan and how do they all work together. This image is helping to explain that the official plan is kind of like an overarching document that provides the direction, the strategic direction. And then we have these strategies that are intersecting. They apply in their specific areas, but you can see that they intersect, they overlap with each other, and they're the responsibility of different divisions. So we have to work with other divisions on these different strategies. And also the goals and objectives of a number of these strategies are complementary, and they support the city to become a more resilient place. So I'm going to talk about some of the tools that we've developed to help ensure that the built environment is designed with nature in mind. And I wanted to start with this image because we're starting to be able to see the change in Toronto. Now, in this case, it's largely being driven by green roofs and the green roof bylaw. But there are other supportive tools that we're developing that are moving the needle in Toronto towards more biodiverse and resilient development. So we're really starting to think about our planning tools and how they can be used effectively to ensure better development outcomes for the environment. So the key tool that we have is called the Toronto Green Standard, and it helps to achieve the city's environmental priorities, including around these 5 performance categories: air quality, energy, water quality and quantity, and ecology and biodiversity is one of the key performance categories, also circular economy. And the Toronto Green Standard has there are 3 separate standards for 3 different types of development: city-owned development, mid and high-rise development, both residential and non-residential, and low-rise development. So these are just different forms of development, and we adjust the standards somewhat to respond to the different form. But I'm going to focus in on what we're doing here around ecology and biodiversity. And I just want to say that this has really been a market transformation tool. We have been working with industry in different areas by bringing this green standard into effect for new development in Toronto. We're driving the development of these skills and products in the marketplace. We meet with different sectors in the marketplace. Like, for example, we've met with the window wall industry to advise them of our new bird-friendly development requirements, and to make sure that they're aware that it's coming and that they're able to respond, and that the products will be available when the new requirement comes into effect. So we're using our tools to help drive what's happening in the marketplace, which I think is the way government can really be effective. So one of our key Toronto Green Standard requirements is also a bylaw, and it's Toronto's Green Roof Bylaw. In 2009, Toronto became the first city in North America to adopt a green roof bylaw. And the bylaw requires green roofs and also governs how they're constructed. So it provides details on how they should be built so that they will be, they're not going to fail, they're going to be successful. So this is another area where we've shifted the industry. The development industry has shifted. Now green roofs are becoming one of the basic building components in Toronto. The Green Roof Bylaw has been a catalyst for scaling up the green roof industry. and serve the city well in improving climate resilience. And in some ways expanding habitat, although, you know, a lot of these roofs don't provide a lot of habitat. We do have a guideline for biodiverse green roofs. So it is something that we do encourage. And I mean, green roofs, when they're living, they're not supposed to die, they're supposed to be living. They improve the quality of storm water, reduce the urban heat island, improve air quality, reduce energy consumption, and in some cases increase biodiversity or support biodiversity. We also have something called bird-friendly development guidelines. As most of you know, birds have no concept of glass. Each year, more than 25 million migratory birds die after colliding with windows in Canada. In Toronto, it's estimated that millions of birds are killed each year due to collisions with glass. And there's over 170 species that have been identified by the by FLAP that have been killed in Toronto by bird collisions. So this is an area where Toronto is unique. We're located, if you look at this map here, Toronto is found in this area right here at the intersection of a blue line and a red line. And this is the intersection of two major migratory flyways, the Mississippi and the Atlantic. And these are highways that birds use to travel throughout North America, from their wintering grounds in the south to their breeding grounds in the north. So Toronto's location is unique. And also, we have many tall buildings. There's lots of glass, and Toronto has a lot of light, which tends to attract migratory birds because they use light as one of the guides when they migrate. So buildings located in Toronto are a major hazard to migratory birds. So we have developed our bird-friendly standard, our requirements for bird-friendly glazing. And this is just a description of what that bird-friendly requirement consists of. We require that 85% of exterior glazing within the first 16 meters of the building above grade be treated either with low reflectance, opaque materials like frosted glass or something, or visual markers be applied at a 50 by 50 millimeter spacing to the first surface of the glass. That's the outside surface, because that 50 by 50 and first surface has been determined to be the most effective way at preventing bird collisions. So that's bird-friendly glazing. And we also, in the Ecology and Biodiversity section of the Toronto Green Standard, we also address trees. And we want to promote trees to become, to grow healthy and be long-lived. And we've determined that the key requirement for this is adequate soil volumes. That's one of the reasons why you have many dead trees along the streets in the past, is because they didn't have enough soil to sustain the tree. So now we have requirements. 30 meters cubed of soil is a minimum required for every new tree, a 2-year watering program, and a maintenance program to ensure their survival. If they survive the first 2 years, they're usually pretty good. That's the most critical time. We also have a requirement to plant 50% of the landscaped areas across the city with native and pollinator friendly species. Now, when you get close to the ravines, that percent goes up to 100%, must be native species. And now we have a new requirement. This is another new thing that I'm showing you that's coming into effect May 1st. And that is of the native species, of the 100% native species adjacent to our ravines, half of those native species must be sourced from a regional, from an area that's near to Toronto. We call these a regional seed source, because these are the plants which are most adapted to local biodiversity and are most likely to provide the maximum biodiversity benefits for our natural areas, which are our ravines. Okay, one more, light pollution. Our Toronto Green Standard also requires that all exterior light fixtures must be dark sky compliant in order to reduce light pollution. And again, this is important adjacent to natural features, that we not have light spillage into these areas, because that can affect the circadian rhythms of the animals and their ability to live and breed normally. And okay, one more thing, and then I think that's the end of my presentation. I just wanted to mention another tool that we have, and that's the soft landscaping bylaw. And it is, in effect, it requires a certain amount of the landscaping that is required by the bylaw. A certain amount of that landscaping must be soft landscaping. So it can be soil and vegetation. It cannot be paving stones. It cannot be, whoops, sorry, I shouldn't have clicked. It cannot be what is that artificial turf that you see in some people's front yards. That is not considered to be soft landscaping. So in the front yard, 75% of the landscaping must be soft landscaping. And in the rear yard, we have, depending on the lot frontage, different landscaping, soft landscaping requirements. So this is another way that the city's trying to ensure that we protect our pervious areas, those areas where water can infiltrate into the soil and where you can plant large shade-grown trees. And finally, this quote from Jane Jacobs: perhaps it will be the city that reawakens our understanding and appreciation of nature in all its teeming, unpredictable complexity. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I think there was one other thing I was supposed to do, Ellen. I think I was supposed to talk about some tips around engagement, which I'm happy to do. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'll let Ellen take over.
Thanks so much, Jane. That really, I think that was perfect timing, and you really gave us an overview of, as you described it, the push and pull, the fact that we have a remarkable biodiversity in the city, but we also have a remarkable rate of growth. We're the fourth largest city in North America, so there's a real tension there. You've described some recently proposed changes, so you've brought us up to the minute. And you've walked us through the various strategies, and you sort of given us a glimpse of some of the complexity. That I particularly think of that diagram of those many intersecting circles, which really we could puzzle over for a long time. And so so that is terrific. And there's been really good feedback so far. And why don't we sort of break into some of these questions? I mean, I'll pick up with one that related to, this was a question from Rita about the care for street trees, and she pointed out that street trees, especially in drought, need watering, and that local business improvement areas don't feel that they've got the capacity or the funds to do that. And so can you give us a sense of maintenance of street trees, how that would be handled?
Okay, well, I'm a city planner. I'm not an urban forester. All I can really say is that with new development, we have requirements to ensure that that the trees are most likely to survive and grow to maturity. And there are, I think the watering requirement might actually be increasing to 3 years now. I'd have to double check that, but so it's, I agree that in drought times there is a need for I mean, some trees, especially the young ones, the older ones are probably tapping water from a much deeper level. But I'm sorry, I don't want to speak out of turn here because I'm not in that part of the organization. So I can speak more to city planning, environmental planning issues than I can some of the, although I do, I do work with those staff and there's a lot of collaboration, but I don't work much on street trees. But I do know that we're developing tree trenches. There's technology that the city's developing to support mature, long-lived trees. So there's a lot of work being done because we recognize just how valuable our street trees are. And the urban canopy study that I mentioned really reinforced that they are heavy lifters in this city.
Yes, it's a remarkable statistic, and it's one that we need to keep in mind. Here is a question that relates to bird-friendly building guidelines, and perhaps it is somewhat along the same lines, but it relates to the fact that the bird-friendly building guidelines apply to new buildings, but that of course the vast majority of our buildings are existing and they predate those guidelines, and there are definitely birds killed by those. So the question, I mean, it's an observation, but I guess it also is a question for the community to ask, well, what could be asked of the real estate community, the property owners, to address that.
Well, the planning policies generally don't come into effect unless there's a development application. So a new building that is subject to the planning policies. So that observation is correct. A lot of the existing buildings could potentially still and do are a hazard for migratory birds. But there have been a number of situations where those buildings have been identified through the work largely of organizations like FLAP. They've been identified, and either through encouragement or through actual taking the building owner to court. They've had to address this issue because the Ministry of the Environment has determined that light emitted from buildings is considered a pollutant. So it is something that if it's impacting on migratory species, then there is a basis for legal action. So, I mean, this would be very significant buildings that have been subject to this. But so, I mean, that's obviously one thing that can be done, but I think generally public awareness is going to be the best thing, and becoming, I don't know if people are starting to see these bird-friendly windows. If you walk around the city, I'm seeing them along Queen Street. There's one in front of Metro Hall at 55 John Street. The A&W across the street has bird-friendly windows. Like, you're starting to see them. Like,
sure, they're everywhere.
To see the results of what we're doing. And because Toronto is growing so much, we seize the opportunity to include this requirement, and we stretched ourselves because we don't necessarily have the authority to control every aspect of a building. So it was fortunately it was no, we haven't really gotten any pushback. I think everyone loves birds. Nobody wants to hurt them. So everybody is good intentions, but until people replace their windows with bird friendly everywhere. Sorry, I don't want to go on
No,
too much.
that is interesting that there's been no pushback from the development industry, and so
No.
really it's a matter of I would say the nature community helping to build that awareness and to say, well, this really should be the status quo. I see a question here related to the description of the regional seed sources that you've described.
Mm-hmm.
And a question about where those seeds would come from. Is there a list of suppliers? So perhaps there'd be something that you could share with in the chat or with me later on. There's a lot of interest in the list of suppliers that could.
Well,
yeah.
it's okay. There's some issues there because capacity in the industry is something that we're particularly concerned about. And how do you verify this? And what is a regional seed source? These are all questions that we're dealing with at the moment, and we're working. I've had a couple of webinars with the nursery industry, and there's different organizations that have developed sort of their own kind of designation of what is native and I can't remember. I can forward you the link to this particular name for a regional seed source plants. Also, like, how do you define a regional, like what is a regionally sourced seed? This is there's some debate about this. It's not a perfect science. What we're trying to do is think about how the climate might change in the Toronto region. So picking regions, bioregions around Toronto that would be suitable even if the climate does warm. So we've identified a number of bioregions, but at the moment it will be public at the after May 1st is when the new requirement comes into effect, and we'll have some supporting information on our website. So perhaps check back at that time.
Okay, that's great. There are a lot of questions and really interesting questions, and I think that we'll want to maybe if we go to about 8:05, would that be okay, Jane?
Yeah, sure.
That gives us another 10 minutes. So
yeah,
there is a question here that this is sort of a different topic, and it relates to ravine hillsides that are privately owned, and the fencing in of entire hillsides right up to the edge of the ravine, and that some of those fences are opaque. What would be how would the ravine bylaw relate to that kind of treatment of ravines?
well, I know I have seen like because of the history of the way Toronto property, the parcels were laid out, there are a number, particularly in the old city of Toronto, where private parcels extend into the ravine system. So in the newer areas, we've managed to acquire the land below top of bank. And that is something we do when we have a development application. And if they own land below the top of bank, we usually take that land as part of the development. So they have to give that up. And it's of no use to them really, because it doesn't give them any development rights. They can't develop it on it anyway. So, but we bring it into public ownership at the time of the development. And sorry, I'm getting a little off track, but I thought that was an important thing for people to know, that the land, we do have a program of bringing natural features into public ownership, and we have policies to support that. Also, we have policies that prevent us from disposing of our lands that are in the natural heritage system in the ravines and the green space system. We're discouraged and prevented from disposing. Well, that means selling those lands. But in terms of the fences, if somebody's putting up a new fence, they would need a ravine permit. Yes. Okay. But the existing fences, it's not much we can do about those.
Okay, yeah, so many really fascinating questions. Jane, you'd mentioned that you would be happy to give some pointers on
Oh
engaging
yeah,
with the city or
yeah.
consulting. And you're aware of the recent debate or controversy that happened at Ashbridges Bay with the disc
Mhm.
golf that was installed, and there was no consultation, and then of course more recently it's been removed. So maybe I could phrase the question this way: like, how would you recommend that the nature community respond to situations like that? What are the best avenues for speaking up on a site specific issue where we
Mhm.
see that sort of thing happen?
Right. Well, I mean, I think the way that issue was handled by the nature advocates, I think they did a pretty good job. They were. It's important. It's important to reach out to the right people, I guess, and starting with the park supervisor, I think I mean, the park supervisors are responsible for managing the park system, and they're doing, you know, a lot of them are doing amazing work. And I know down along the waterfront, there's been a lot of restoration. There are sand dunes that they're restoring. There's habitat that they're restoring. So they're trying their best. So when you do reach out to them, just be polite, be courteous, but be specific about what you want. Providing data, I think, is helpful if you can support your request with specific data. Like I noticed that they provided information about species that were documented, and they were demonstrating that this was a significant natural area, that and that it shouldn't be a disc golf hole or whatever that is. So they, identifying your concerns in writing. It's not always necessary to copy the whole world, but I think start with the park supervisor. If that doesn't work, then broaden your net. I would then try to involve the local counselor, perhaps, as someone who can help facilitate the discussion or the negotiation that is going on. So that's when you see situations like that, that's helpful. And the official plan policies, obviously, if there was development happening, the official plan policies would come into play. If it's a natural area in the official plan, it's an ESA. Those areas have the highest level of protection. So I think that those can be invoked as important. Like the council wants that area to be natural, right? That's part of what is already approved, but it's hard to, I guess, there's always a balance in trying to figure out what recreational activities should be permitted and what shouldn't. But certainly, they I think made the right decision in the end.
And data, as you say, data was
Yeah.
having documentation and being respectful and persistent.
Yeah. I mean, we're all trying to work towards the same goal, and ultimately, I mean, this is one of the bigger issues, I guess, is use of the system, and how, like, I don't like to use the word balance sometimes, because to me that implies, equal, but I think in some cases the natural environment should be more equal. And in some cases, recreational uses are more important. So, it's, I think, I don't know where I'm going with that thought.
Well, I think, I mean, if I can just say, I think that the city staff do have big big challenges because they do have to serve the whole population. And in a pandemic, people have desperately needed places to get out. So there's all of that going on for sure. But yeah,
being
I think,
persistent
yes,
is good too. Like,
yeah,
I think, and being advocates, but
yes,
also there are also opportunities to input during times like we're going through amendments to the official plan. So that's another good time for people to input and to say what they want in this city. And, if they want, more resources put towards protection. I mean, that's more budget time. You should come out at budget time and like find the right times in, when the city is considering the issue, and then bring forward your concerns and your wish list. I think, and I'm definitely, you guys do that. I see you at committees and presenting and whatnot. So just a reminder that I think that's really important, and it gives it a profile that
yes.
it needs. It needs to be, people need to be constantly reminded, because we all take the environment for granted sometimes.
Yeah, no, I can definitely emphasize what you're saying about cats.
Sorry,
No.
cat bombing.
No, about budget time. That the budget committee is there, and the mayor is sitting right there, and you do get your 5 minutes to speak on behalf of Toronto Field Naturalists or any organization, and so democracy does work. I want to say, first of all, there's been a lot of thank yous to you, Jane, and many people very, very appreciative that you've given your time. It's been an excellent presentation. I'd like to touch on the question of environmentally significant areas. Because the question here is, how would the city prioritize which ESAs receive the most attention in terms of promoting biodiversity, or which ones will get will be the first to get plans or implementation attention? Is how does the city make that kind of decision?
Well, I there at the moment, I think it's there isn't a framework, but I believe one is going to be developed, and that there will be the opportunity for input into that framework. So it's there are 86 of them, and a couple more that we're designating, so it's a lot of areas to have to manage, and the question is, how do you prioritize those? And that is an excellent question. And it is something that staff are thinking about, and going to be coming forward with something like that. And I think actually reaching out to some of the nature groups and asking for their input into that prioritization.
Great. Yeah, very good to know that there'll be a public consultation on that, and that's coming.
I don't know if it's public consultation, but I think they might be looking to stakeholders.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. So here's I think, well, I'm gonna have to make this the last question, because you've been on the hot seat here for a bit, and it's after 8 and people are dropping off. But I think this is an interesting question. As new areas are developed, are there any standards for adding new green spaces? It does not seem so in downtown Toronto. So the whole challenge of adding new green space in a rapidly growing area.
Yeah.
That's a big question to end on, but
yes, it is.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard on an individual development parcel. Often the city will take cash in lieu instead of land, because we don't want little bits of land, on every development site. We want to be able to acquire a significant piece of land, and certainly in the downtown, that's a challenge. And Rail Deck Park was one of the proposed responses to that. But in other parts of the city, for example, in Downsview, where there's a whole new secondary, refresh going on of the secondary plan, there's new park space being planned. So if the site is big enough, there's an opportunity to add new park space. But in the more smaller sites, it's very challenging, and the city will often, if it's not suitable, will take cash in lieu. Just on that point, though, if a development is adjacent to a ravine area, we'll often require restoration of the edge of the ravine. So anything that's at or near the top of bank, and usually within the buffer, which is around 10 meters, we will require restoration. So that's not park space per se, but we're trying to restore as much as we can the edges of the ravine. So it's a small thing, but it adds up over time. And in terms of the park spaces, it's something that I think we all realized how incredibly valuable our park spaces were over the last 2 years. Unfortunately, they're not making any more land in the downtown, but we're doing the best that we can with it, and connecting the existing parks is another way to sort of maximize their use.
And again, this is going to be a challenge for the nature community to say this is a priority, and yes, it'll be difficult, but let's make it a priority. So again, Jane, thank you so much. There are so many really grateful comments saying that so it was actually quite reassuring, your talk, so that it was good to hear, and you have a vote of confidence from a sibling. So yeah,
Okay.
so this is really terrific. So thank you so much. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to very quickly share screen and offer a few upcoming lectures that the TFN is hosting. So much appreciated, Jane. It really was terrific of you, and we're going to have to do this again. We're going to have to do this again somehow. There was so much interest. So let me quickly share screen here, and I hope that this will work. Yes, so before we sign off, the people who are members of the Toronto Field Naturalists, you received an invitation to take a lecture committee survey. It was sent either March 27 and also March 29. So look for that. You still have 1 day to fill out that survey and tell us what kind of lectures you would like in the future. So we care about your input. And on Sunday, May 8th, we have another lecture, Restoring American Chestnut in Southern Ontario. So we know that, of course, American chestnut used to be a dominant forest tree across Southern Ontario, really a remarkable thing, and a tragedy to have lost it. And here's a man who has devoted years of his life to breeding a blight-resistant American chestnut. And we have on Thursday evening, May 19th, so this is not a Sunday afternoon event, but a Thursday evening event, we have our own Jason Ramsey Brown, who's the past president of the Toronto Field Naturalists, and he will be talking about restoring cottonwood flats in the Don Valley. And for Toronto Field Naturalists members, you know that we have been doing citizen science at Cottonwood Flats in partnership with the city for quite a number of years now. And that project is expanding. It's also produced wonderful information. And there are really, we have great hopes for restoration of this site. So that is Thursday, May 18 at 7 p.m. And so the spring has definitely arrived, and we hope to see you all on the trails and enjoying that, and keep speaking up for nature. So thanks so much, everyone, for being here, and that's the end of the evening.